Hi, everybody. I'm Holly Lewis. I am the chair of the Buckeye American Legion College Committee, and I'm really happy to be with you here virtually today. I'm sorry that I could not be here in person, but I had a prior commitment, and so that's why we're recording the class. The team is going to play this for you, and then they're going to work with you to answer any questions that you have. So the topic that I'm going to cover today is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the reason why we wanted to cover this is because it is really important to us as an organization that we have as diverse a membership as we possibly can. So we wanted to cover a couple of things today. So first of all, we wanted to talk through the objective of this class, talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and why it's important to the American Legion. So our objectives today are really to educate you by defining diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as other terms that are commonly heard these days in the news. We want to prepare you as a leader to become aware of bias so that you could be part of the solution. We want to encourage a discussion as to why this topic is key to the growth of our American Legion organization. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was diversity, and I want to define that. So diversity is really the condition of being composed of many different types of people in a group or in an organization. You hear the word diversification when it comes to your investments. It's the same concept with membership in an organization or group, having a diverse group of people. And there are two types of diversity. First, there's internal diversity types, and those are things that you are born with and cannot be changed. And then there's also external diversity types that you acquire or choose that can be changed. So some of the internal diversity types are things like race, age, your origin, national origin, your ethnicity, your culture, your gender, your sexual preference, your physical ability, and your mental ability. External diversity types are things like your interests, your education, your appearance, your citizenship, your family status, your religion, your relationship status, your economic status, your experience. So those are all things that you acquire versus internal are things that you're just born with. Another term that is very prevalent these days is bias. Now, you've all heard the word prejudice before, and all prejudice means is it's a prejudgment. So you're making a judgment in advance based on some category of thing. So all bias is a prejudice in favor of or against a person or group of persons that's generally considered to be unfair. And there are two types of biases, and I'm sure that you've heard this second one a lot in the news. The first is the conscious bias, where you are fully aware that you have a preference for a person or a group over another. Unconscious bias, you're not aware that you have a preference. And this type is actually far more prevalent than a conscious bias. So I want to talk about unconscious bias for a little while here. So the way that our brains work, our brains categorize everything we experience. That's just the way our brains work. It labels things, it puts like things together. Just that's the way it works. And our brains also evolved to have us gravitate towards a group of people that are most like our own in order to survive. So being alone back in the day, in the caveman days, was not a good thing. You would get eaten by a dinosaur. You needed to be part of the group, and more than likely, the group was going to look and act just like you. We all form unconscious biases during our childhood. That is a fact. We're either taught things by our loved ones or in school. An example of an unconscious bias that we might have is towards Native Americans. Ask yourself the question, who discovered America? If you remember your childhood days, you're probably going to say Christopher Columbus. What about the American Indians? They were here first. So can you see where we were all taught a bias during our childhood? So once you become aware of an unconscious bias, you can work to understand it and to minimize it. There are tests available that will help you become more aware of your unconscious bias at implicit.harvard.edu. And there's a whole selection of tests on various topics that you can take to see if you have an unconscious bias. The other term that we're hearing these days is privilege. And there's a little bit of controversy definitely around this term. But I want to define privilege as what you don't have to worry about because of who you are. It's not something that I have. It's just something that I don't have to even think about because of who I am. So as an example, as a woman, it is a privilege to cry in public. Most people would just ignore it. However, if a man was to cry, that man might be judged differently and thought less of for this. People might question, what is wrong with him, where it would never, ever happen for a woman. Another example is as a white person, it's a privilege to not even consider that you would be discriminated against for a job because of your skin color. It never crosses a white person's mind to think that. That is a privilege. You can have a privilege based on any diversity type. You can have it based on your education. Say you're a doctor, you have a privilege. People respect you because you're a doctor. You don't have to worry about people not respecting your opinion. So it's just things like that. It's what you don't have to worry about because of who you are. Now let's talk about equity. So equity is the processes and practices that are intended to create equal outcomes between marginalized and non-marginalized people or groups of people. And what I mean by marginalized is less important, more important. So remember, this is the processes and the practices that are trying to make it so that the outcomes are more equal. Equity practices and laws provide different support based on marginalized groups. So, for example, a law that promotes equity is affirmative action. Equity is not the same as equality. Equality is the overarching goal of all people or groups of people having the same odds of success or the same odds of being treated the same, regardless of their diversity type. Equity is necessary to achieve equality. Now let's talk about inclusion. Inclusion is the act of including, involving, respecting, and empowering all people or groups to participate regardless of their category. It is not enough to simply include or allow someone to participate. The goal of inclusion is to make sure that everyone feels that they belong and that they are respected and valued. So why does this matter? Every person has value to contribute to our organization, and we're potentially missing out by excluding them. It has been proven in many, many case studies that organizations that have diverse members are stronger, more efficient, more adaptable, and more resilient. Diverse organizations are able to attract more members simply because the potential member sees themselves reflected in the membership. And diverse organizations get better results because they collectively come up with solutions that would not have been possible if a less diverse group was involved. So, unconscious bias. What is the most relevant examples for us? First of all, there's an affinity bias that is prevalent in the American Legion. So, an affinity bias means preferring to include the category that we are most like. So, for example, people of color now make up 43% of the military, yet most posts come nowhere near this percentage in their person of color legionnaires. That's a fact. Unless it's a person of color post, there's no way that we're anywhere near this. Gender bias, preferring to include one gender over another. Women now make up 18% of the military, yet most posts do not have that percentage of female legionnaires. Why is that? Age bias, preferring a person based on their age. So an example of this is not allowing younger members to be in leadership positions or have a voice because they're too young, or discounting long-term members' opinions because they're too old. It works both ways. I really want you to think about this and ask yourself, why is this? A lot of it has to do with inclusion. You might say, the post might say, we allow everyone to join, but are you really making them feel welcome? I will tell you on the gender side that I really had to think long and hard about joining my post because there were no women legionnaires. And so I did not see myself reflected in the membership. Just something to think about. So what can you do? First of all, we're asking you, please educate yourself. This class was a great first step, and there's a lot of information available from reputable sources, some of which are included in the appendix of this presentation. Explore your unconscious bias. Take some or all of the tests on the Harvard website. Get curious about how your unconscious bias developed and think about how you can change it, how you can recognize it, and how you can change it. It doesn't have to be that way. You can change it. Proactively seek out friends who aren't in your category. And what I mean by that is seek out people who have different experiences than you. Seek out people who are different ages than you. Have friends younger, older, black, white. Expand, diversify your friends. Be curious and seek to understand how your friends, your new friends, see things in the world and ask them about these things. Proactively seek ways to improve the diversity at your post. Take a look at your membership. How many female legionnaires do you have? Why is that? If you have a couple, why don't you ask them, why aren't more women joining the post? I bet they could tell you. Ask your people of color, why don't we have more people of color at the post? Why don't we have more younger legionnaires? This is all a diversity problem. And then educate your members as to why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important to our organization. And do not tolerate prejudice and crappy behavior. There's no place for that in our posts. So the team's going to take some questions now, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I really hope it made you think. Um, you know, I know it's a hot topic and somewhat controversial in some circles, but really we need to be curious and ask ourselves the question of whether or not we really do have some unconscious bias and what can we do about it. I hope you all have a great day. And if there are questions that you want to ask afterwards, you can always email me at buckeyealc@ohiolegion.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.